Welcome to Dakota Preparedness. This video is about survival. 12 tips to keep you alive in emergency situations. Now, the first half is inspired by a recent movie I watched this week called The Outback. No, not the restaurant. Outback is in the interior of Australia. And this will be a bit of a spoiler alert, but it's a good movie and I would highly recommend it. But the storyline is about a young couple who travels to Australia to have an adventure, a beach adventure. So the first thing they do is they go to the beach. And it illustrates tip number 1, which is know the dangers in your area. The man in the movie gets bit by a jellyfish, and it is a horrendous wound as depicted in the movie. Now, I have very little experience with jellyfish, but I remember off the coast of Corpus Christi in Texas, a friend and I were sailing with a small sunfish sailboat when it capsized, and he got stung by a jellyfish, and wow, was it painful, and it left a nasty wound. So be aware of what dangers are in the area. Now later the young couple encounter Australian snakes, Australian scorpions. They are bad news. There's a lot of things in Australia, reptiles and insects that will kill your butt. Now what I'm familiar with in my area is we have bears, black bears, and some years we have lots of them, and we enjoy them. Now, for the most part, they are very shy, and as soon as they see a human, they want to leave the area. And if you simply say, go away, then they run away. But let me tell you, you would not want to surprise one of them or get between some cubs and a mother. Now, a little trick with that with bears, I learned from an Alaskan Indian who was in his late 40s or early 50s, and he said when they travel in Alaska with there's 2 or more people, you simply talk. And he says, we've never had a problem with any bears if we're talking. You've got to make noise where they can hear you and not be surprised. And he says, if you're by yourself, well, it's a simple solution. You sing to yourself. Another thing, having lived in the southeast of the United States, is snakes. Oh my goodness, I hate snakes. So especially at certain times of the year in the summer, the early spring and the late fall, you got to be looking for snakes in the southeast of Florida. You're looking down on the ground and looking for them. If you walk up to a log, before you step over that log, kind of lean over and make sure there's not a snake there. Another thing is to have a walking stick, and anytime you reach your hand into a area that you can't see very well, beware of snakes. Number 2, the young couple did not have apparently a hard copy of a map. He had in the United States downloaded some map software to his GPS system, and this didn't work out very well for them as depicted in the movie. I would highly recommend, if you're in an unknown area, have some hard copy maps. And a GPS system is a wonderful thing, but make sure you have dedicated maps to the area that you're traveling in and validate it to the hard copy maps. I've literally had U.S. topographical maps where I had the map and the actual terrain featured did not match the map. In other words, somehow over the decades it had changed. Number 3, the young couple did recognize the huge distances they were traveling when they decided to go visit a popular tourist site in the interior of Australia, and they bought an extra 5 gallons of gas. But later you see they were woefully understocked for water. Now, one time I drove to Alaska, which I don't recommend. It's very expensive. For gas, for food. In parts of northern British Columbia and in the Yukon, we joked about there wasn't a mechanic 500 miles ahead of us and 500 miles behind us. So I do recommend going to Alaska, but I would suggest you fly up there or go up there on a cruise. But while I waited at a small restaurant and RV campsite about 10 miles inside of Alaska from the Yukon, my son-in-law had to hitchhike with two flat tires to Toth, Alaska, a 180-mile round trip. And as I sat on the porch of the restaurant watching the native Alaskans pull in and out in their vehicles, I noticed they frequently had two tires. They had not one jerry can with extra gas, but two of them. And they had plenty of survival equipment in the back of their car or on top of it. So later when we got to a big city and I had to replace all four of my tires, I told the tire dealer, I said, pick out the best of the four tires and just throw it in the back so I have two spares. So make sure you have plenty of water, especially if you're in a desert situation. Have plenty of gas. If you need one or two or more jerry cans, have them. Have two spares. Have some food. So that's survival tip number 3. Number 4, when you're in the desert, and this got the young couple in trouble, distant land features appear closer than they are in reality. They can be a long way off. And this got the young couple in trouble, deep trouble. So be aware of that when you're in the desert. One time I was traveling out west and I got to looking at from a vantage point at the Grand Canyon. I thought, wouldn't it be fun to hike down there? And I thought, no, it's a good way to get yourself killed or the people with you killed. Dehydration is no joke. And so you need to be physically able to accomplish the hike and have plenty of water. Number 5 is desert hikes in general are very complex. The land is flat. It looks the same. You can't get up to an observation post easily, and you could get yourself lost easily. Another situation where the terrain is just inherently difficult is swamps and jungles. One time a teenage brother and I got off of the river trail in Florida and found out that we just could not use the outboard motor to go forward. And we couldn't find the route that we'd come in on. So it took us 5 hours to go to 300 yards to get back to the river. And we were young and tough and agile. We were both high school wrestlers, and we were exhausted by the time we got back the river. So be careful of swamps and jungles. My oldest brother served a year in Vietnam with a rifle company, and he said 6 months of that was in the jungle, and 6 months essentially was at the tail end Charlie Fire Base. He said he was constantly wet in the jungle. They had to worry about snakes. The leeches were always getting them. And he says, of course, there was a little concern about Charlie, meaning the North Vietnamese regulars and the Viet Cong. And he says they would lay booby traps for him, they would snipe him. And he says, with one exception, whenever they had a large unit engagement, that Charlie was determining the time and the place. It was an ambush. Number 6, what was the couple's undoing and caused the untimely death of the man in the video was dehydration. Key here is don't drink your urine. He started drinking his urine. He was so desperate for water. Now, in reality, yes, when urine comes out of your body, it is sterile. However, very quickly, it's full of bacteria. It has toxins. It has so much salt in it that it will use up more water than it provides. So don't drink the urine. Now, in the end, the young man on autopsy died from taking a straw and sticking it down into the window cleaner reservoir and drinking window cleaner fluid. And that caused him to go into renal failure. So don't drink crazy things like that. Number 7 would be don't drink salt water. That's one of the key rules in if your ship goes down in the Navy, just don't drink the salt water. And the major reason is it has more salt in it than you can tolerate. It will pull out more water than it provides in the actual salt water, and you will die of dehydration caused from vomiting, diarrhea, eventually going into delusions. Just don't do it. Number 8 is there's an old saying, half of survival is knowing when to turn around. So whether it's mountain climbing or a hike, if things get too dicey, it's time to turn around. There's literally been cases where people have been focused on their objective so strongly, they actually make the hike at the top of the peak, but they're so physically wasted they die on the descent. Number 9 is my father, who fought with the 3rd Infantry Division in World War II, was fond of saying, it's the man that wins the gunfight, not the gun. And he should know about that because he survived 300 gunfights with the Nazis. So having a gun is a good thing for security, but make sure that you have the proper training, the mental state, and the respect for that weapon, and know tactics where it can provide you safety. And those parts of the things are within yourself. So the man wins the gunfight, not the gun. Number 10, my dad would talk about why he survived the war. And he was a country boy. He was an incredible marksman. He knew how to track. He had hunted just about anything you can eat down in Florida. But he received what he thought was excellent training from the U.S. military. Now, he said the first 2 weeks when he was with the 3rd Infantry Division, he said nobody wanted to even know your name because there was a high probability you wouldn't survive the first 2 weeks. You'd either get your $1 million wound and sent home all physically messed up, or you would be killed. But he said after about 2 weeks, the old-timers would start teaching you some tricks. And he says there's some basic tricks that you have to know to survive in a gunfight. So one time I asked him, I said, well, what specifically did you think that from all of your life experiences led you to survive World War II? And he says, well, that's simple. It's luck. He says, you've got to have some luck. He says, I've seen men that were just incredible soldiers and had been in North Africa, Sicily, Anzio, France, and they were at the wrong place at the wrong time and they were killed. So I don't know how you can do it exactly, but always have some luck. Although I will suggest listen to your inner self. If you just don't feel the mojo's right, back out. Number 11 is don't drink the Kool-Aid, particularly the grape Kool-Aid. Now, Kool-Aid is a great product, and I've used it extensively in my life. But what I'm talking about is metaphorically. In 1978, there was a evangelist who created a cult. They moved to South America, to I believe it was French Guiana, and in the process of living there, their practices became aware to a number of authorities in the United States, and a California congressman flew down there for an investigation, and then as he was leaving, he was gunned down with a number of people in his party, and that triggered this cult serving poison, bug juice, if you will, to hundreds of people. I believe it was approximately about 900 people that died from poisoning. And in some cases, they didn't want to drink the poison, but there were armed men who were the zealots who forced them into it. Now, a few of them escaped into the jungle and survived. But what does this mean? Well, does it make rational sense to do something? If it's not in your interest, you're in charge of your own destiny. Back out, do something else. And number 12 is know how to handle cold and heat. Now, cold is actually, I've found living in South Dakota was more doable. You have more control. You can move around. You can put layers of clothes on. We even had a little trick in Boy Scouts where in the evening we would take a stone and put it in the fireplace and heat it up, and then put it in a paper bag and put it in our sleeping bag, and that was just great. And you had to be careful not to touch it when you first put it in there, but by the early morning after it had been there for hours, you could hug it and feel some warmth coming out of that stone. Now, heat is actually a little more challenging because you can, take outer clothing off and cool off, but you can also, it's important to stay in shade. When I was on Diego Garcia with the Navy Seabees at night, sometimes it was so hot in our hooch, I would just take water and just wipe it all over my chest and then go to bed and let it evaporate. So staying warm and staying cool are both challenges. One little suggestion that was provided by a lone survivor was, if you can't feel the cold, that means start working on getting yourself warmed up. Now, so hopefully these 12 tips will help you stay alive, and I hope you're never in an emergency where you need to use them, but if you have to, I hope you find them useful. If you found this video helpful, please click like and subscribe. It helps the channel and it helps the community. Be prepared.